The haunted composer. The house sat quiet and heavy, like it was waiting for him. Samuel Lockhart sat at his piano, feeling the weight of the night pressing on him. The air in the small cottage was thick, smelling of old wood and the faint tang of dust, stirred up by his restless pacing. He had come here to escape, to find solitude, to write a piece that he hoped would finally say what he'd always struggled to express in words. Instead, the emptiness only filled him with silence. He was used to these late nights. The hours dragged on as he struggled to force the melody he'd been searching for, but tonight was different. Somewhere past midnight, as he let his fingers drift across the keys, a faint melody wound its way into his thoughts. Soft, haunting, just a few notes. Yet it felt familiar. A shiver ran down his spine, though he wasn't sure why. The melody felt like it was coming from somewhere beyond him, yet nestled so deep inside that it felt like an echo of something he'd long forgotten. At first, he thought it was exhaustion. It had to be. He'd been pushing himself for days. Barely eating, barely sleeping. The stress was finally getting to him, or so he told himself. But then, the melody returned, a whisper at the edge of his mind, almost as if it were calling to him. He couldn't stop himself from following it. His fingers moved as if guided by an invisible hand, piecing together notes he didn't remember learning, let alone creating. Each night, the melody grew clearer, as if it were revealing itself in fragments. But it wasn't just the music that began to haunt him. The dreams started soon after. Vivid, tangled dreams that clung to him long after he woke, filled with faces he didn't recognize, places he'd never been. Sometimes he would see a small, dimly lit room lined with old photographs and shelves of dusty trinkets, the faces in the pictures blurred but strangely familiar. Other times, he saw a vast, moonlit lake, a quiet place where only the faintest echo of music played, the same melody that had taken root in his mind. He dismissed the dreams as the product of his obsessive mind. The harder he tried to ignore them, though, the stronger they became, invading his waking thoughts with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. The music began to change him, slipping past his fingers like water one moment, then binding to him, tightening its hold on his mind, his memories. One night, exhausted and desperate for a break from the haunting melody, he left the cottage and stumbled through the forest that surrounded it. He walked in silence, feeling a strange sense of release as he moved further from the house. The night was dark and thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, a quiet so deep it felt like it swallowed him whole. But as he stood there, wrapped in the silence of the forest, he heard it again, soft, almost imperceptible. The melody was following him.
He spun around, searching for the source, but the forest was empty. Yet the music lingered, winding its way through the trees like a ghostly whisper, drawing him back toward the cottage. He couldn't escape it, no matter how far he went. It was as if the melody had become part of him, embedded deep in his bones, and he felt its pull, guiding him back to the piano. Back at the piano, he pressed his hands to the keys, almost in surrender, and let the music flow. With every note, he felt a surge of emotion, loss, regret, something darker. The notes formed shapes in his mind, fragments of memories that weren't his own, each one more painful than the last. He saw the face of a woman, her eyes filled with sorrow, her mouth moving as if speaking, yet he couldn't hear her words. He saw glimpses of a life that felt achingly familiar, yet foreign, a past he couldn't remember living but couldn't deny. It became a nightly ritual. He'd sit, play, and watch the memories unfold, each one clearer, more real, as if he were reliving a life he'd long forgotten. The melody no longer felt like something he was creating. It was like he was uncovering a story, one that had been buried deep within him, waiting to be revealed. One night, as he neared the end of the piece, he felt a strange sense of closure, as if he were reaching the final chapter of a tragic story. The woman's face appeared again, her eyes hollow, her voice now a distant echo. She looked at him, and he could swear she whispered his name, her voice barely audible above the music. Samuel. He stopped, his hands hovering over the keys, his heart pounding. He realized then that this melody wasn't just a piece of music, it was a requiem, a lament for a life he had somehow forgotten. This woman, this memory, she had been part of him once, maybe even loved him, and he had lost her. Or perhaps he'd been the one to let her go. The final notes lingered in the air, heavy and mournful, and he felt something within him lift, as if a weight he hadn't known he'd been carrying had finally been released. The room was silent, the melody finally complete, yet the echo of it remained, a haunting reminder of the life he'd left behind. As he sat in the quiet, a feeling of peace settled over him, one he hadn't known in years. He realized that the music had been his way of saying goodbye to a part of himself he could barely remember, to a love that had long since faded into the shadows of his mind. And as he let his hands fall from the keys, he knew he would never play that melody again. It had served its purpose, a final farewell to the ghost of a forgotten past. In the stillness of the night, Samuel rose from the piano and walked to the window, feeling the weight of years lift as he looked out at the darkened forest. The melody was gone, but its memory lingered, a soft, bittersweet echo that would forever haunt his soul.